Russia's inflation slows faster than anticipated. Chinese President Xi Jinping calls for step-up efforts to build a unified national market. And Oman's foreign assets increased by 0.5% in May. Welcome to the Economic Bulletin. We start off with global news as the 2025 Global Digital Economy Conference theme Building Digitally Friendly Cities has kicked off on Wednesday in Beijing. This four-day event has attracted over 300 international guests from more than 50 countries and key organizations, including the World Trade Organization and BRICS. The conference will highlight emerging fields such as AI integration, digital security, data elements, and digital healthcare. For the first time, the event is co-hosted by the United Nations Development Programme, underscoring its focus on strengthening international cooperation.
In the digital age.
An Allianz research report has shown that recent heat waves across Europe could slow economic growth in Europe by half a percentage point in 2025, comparing a day with temperatures above 32 degrees Celsius to half a day of strikes. The research noted that globally, the heat waves translate to a GDP reduction of 0.6% points this year. Allianz added that China, Spain, Italy and Greece could see GDP losses of nearly 1% point. It also highlighted that productivity losses due to heat can be mitigated. Allianz also called for structural measures to prepare cities and adapt workplaces. Moving on to Europe, where the European Commission has proposed a legally binding target to cut net greenhouse gas emissions by 90% by 2040 from 1990 levels, aiming to keep the European Union on track for its net zero emissions goal by 2050. For the first time, this new target will allow member countries to use carbon credits from developing nations to meet a limited share of their emissions goal. Up to 3% of the 2040 target can be met this way, phased in from 2036 with strict criteria for the credits. This flexibility comes after opposition from several EU governments, including France and Germany, who sought to soften the emissions target for European industries facing high energy costs and global competition.
An amendment to the European climate law that reduces emissions by 90%. Good morning to all of you. We're finally here.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Treasury Chief Rachel Reeves are facing intense pressure after a key parliamentary vote on their welfare spending plans. The measures passed only after the government agreed to soften and delay cuts to disability benefits, appeasing a significant rebellion from within the Labour Party. Reforming the welfare system is a central pledge for Starmer, but the concessions made to pass the bill have raised questions about funding, with Starmer declining to rule out potential autumn tax rises. Opposition leader Kimi Badenoch sharply criticised the government, suggesting Chancellor Reeves was a human shield for Starmer's incompetence. Bank of England policy maker Alan Taylor has stated that a soft landing for Britain's economy was now at risk. He highlighted that bigger cuts are not necessarily needed or desirable. Taylor also noted that having only 8 monetary policy committee meetings per year posed an integer problem from policymakers seeking a faster pace of easing. Still in Europe, Russian Central Bank Governor Elvira Nabiullina has announced that inflation is slowing faster than anticipated, with signs also emerging of easing labor market shortages. Nabiullina noted that weekly data showed that an annualized inflation fell to 9.4% in June, down from 9.9% in May, while the central bank forecast 2025 inflation between 7% and 8%. She also indicated it's likely to be at the lower end of that range, though still above the official 4% target for 2026. The governor added that the central bank could make bolder interest rates cuts if the economy slowdown becomes more significant. Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a decree to launch a new type of investment account that contains withdrawal guarantees as Moscow looks to attract foreign investors to the Russian stock market. The decree stated that foreigners will be able to make new investments in rubles, foreign currency, stocks and bonds in accounts. Russian Industry and Trade Minister Anton Alikhanov has stated that authorities are exploring the introduction of a new industrial levy aimed at shielding local manufacturers from foreign competition while helping to fill widening gaps in the federal budget. Speaking to the Federal Council, Alikhanov highlighted the recycling fee on the automotive sector as an effective protective measure for Russia's domestic car market. Alikhanov further stated that in addition to existing macroeconomic challenges, domestic producers are facing significant threats from dumping, and this practice creates unfair competition for local businesses. And for further analysis, we are now joined from Moscow by visiting a lecturer at Higher School of Economics, Rami Al-Qalyoubi. A very warm welcome to Qnews Economic Bulletin, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you with us in today's episode. Sir, what are the main objectives behind President Putin's latest decree regarding foreign investment guarantees, and how does it differ from previous counter-sanction measures?
Actually, Russia understands that at the moment, as long as there are Western American and sanctions, Russia is not very attractive for foreign investors who might be afraid of secondary sanctions imposed against those who cooperate with Russia. But on the other hand, Russia can enhance some foreign investments from friendly countries by providing guarantees and facilities. These investors might be interested in Russian market to achieve high economic goals and figures. And of course, there is some risk, but in case if there are guarantees and facilities and stimulations, they will cover upon those risks. World companies went even to very risky countries such as Iraq to invest in oil production. Anyway, the situation in Russia, even if it is not very stable on the global level, but still it is not so risky as Iraq or Afghanistan. So in this way, Russia might attract some investments.
Sir, how is the extension of the presidential decree banning oil and petroleum product sales at price caps expected to impact Russia's energy revenues and foreign trade through 2025?
Actually, Russia's budget relies a lot on oil and gas revenues, which decreased a lot since the war in Ukraine started. But still, Russia can get some revenues because even some European countries continue to buy Russian gas and even oil. And there are also, Russia found some alternatives in Chinese and Indian markets. And sometimes, actually, Indian oil products are in fact made out of Russian oil. And at the end of the day, they go to the European market. So that's how Russia can enhance its oil revenues.
What message is the Kremlin sending to domestic and international investors with these new regulatory changes, sir?
Actually, the message is that Russia is safe for investments. There are guarantees. Russia's economy is stable, and actually, Russia could change this typical way of thinking that says that the country in a state of war should become poor and suffer economic problems. It appears to be opposite effect. A country which is leading a limited operation can develop its industries, because actually now industry, not services, are the locomotive of Russian economy. So the message is that everything is stable and foreign investments are welcome.
Given rapid inflation slowdown and easing labor market shortages, how will Russia's central bank adjust monetary policy and can it hit the 4% of 2026 inflation target, sir?
During the last few months, Russia's central bank was struggling against high inflation by maintaining...
Is it struggling because of the war, sir?
Central bank used to maintain very high interest rate, which was 21%, and only in last June it was decreased to 20%, and it's expected to more decrease. Now the central bank says that inflation slowed down and it's possible to soften the monetary policies, but on the other hand, in case if the rate goes down, there is a risk that this money which were in the bank deposits would go to the market, and in this case they will enhance inflation. So actually the central bank has a quite difficult task to balance between reasonable interest rate to enhance business to invest, but on the other hand to reduce inflation.
Sir, how would you characterize the current state of the Russian economy, especially in light of warnings about a potential recession and persistent inflation?
As I mentioned, Russian economy is quite stable, and despite war, Russia managed to stabilize its economy via establishment partnerships with non-Western countries, including Arab, Asian, African countries, and the Western sanctions are not international, so they are not compulsory for other countries. So in this way, Russia's economy could stand down against the sanctions.
Sir, do you read Russia as a strong country today economically in light of the circumstances and the war that it's going and sanctions that they're going through?
Actually, yes, for the moment, Russia is strong enough to stand in front of sanctions and war. On the other hand, in case if the war continues, there might be some long-term negative impacts, such for example, like the lack of labor, because hundreds of thousands of men in the age of work are at war now, at the battlefield. And Russia has to compensate them via immigration, but immigration usually causes other problems such as tensions between immigrants and local citizens. So that's why probably Russia should end the war as soon as possible to restore the civil sector of the economy.
Best of luck, sir, from Moscow. That was visiting lecturer at High School of Economics, Rami Al-Qalyoubi. Thank you very much for your valuable, informative knowledge and insights, and for your time, of course, sir. Back to the news and moving on to Asia, where Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for stepped-up efforts to build a unified national market and promote the high-quality development of the marine economy. Speaking at a meeting at the Central Commission for Financial and Economic Affairs, Xi stressed that creating a unified market is essential for China's new development pattern and overall high-quality growth. He also highlighted the marine economy as crucial for advancing Chinese modernization, emphasizing innovation, environmental protection, and private sector participation in this area. China's foreign minister spokeswoman Mao Ning has declared that the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region has a broad prospect and a promising future, citing its safer society and strong economic competitiveness 5 years after the implementation of the national security law. Mao highlighted the region's 9 consecutive quarters of GDP growth, its ranking among the top 3 international financial centers, and its position as the world's 3rd largest recipient of foreign direct investment. She dismissed Western criticism of the security law as an attempt to destabilize the city, asserting that the law has enhanced stability and protected residents' rights. The Census and Statistics Department has shown that Hong Kong's retail sales by value rose 2.4% in May from a year earlier. The first increase in more than a year. Sales increased to 31.3 billion Hong Kong dollars, the first expansion since February 2024. In April, retail sales fell 2.3% compared with the same month a year before, while May retail sales increased 1.9% from a year earlier. Additionally, the Hong Kong Tourism Board stated that May visitor arrivals rose to 4.8% million, up 20% from the same month a year ago. In Oceania, the Australian Bureau as gains in clothing purchases were offset by a rare drop in food sales, bolstering the case for another cut in interest rates next week. Retail sales rose 0.2% in May from April, when they were flat. The sales of 37.3 billion Australian dollars were up 3.3% on a year earlier, for the slowest annual pace since last November. The Commerce Department's Census Bureau has reported that U.S. construction spending fell in May as higher mortgage rates and rising inventory weighed on single-family housing projects. Construction spending dropped 0.3% after an upwardly revised 0.2% decline in April. Spending fell 3.5% on a year-over-year basis in May. Spending on private construction projects slipped 0.5%. Investment in residential construction also dropped 0.5%, with outlays in new single-family housing projects tumbling 1.8%. The ADP National Employment has reported its U.S. private payrolls fell for the first time in more than 2 years in June, as economic uncertainty hampered hiring, but low layoffs continued to anchor the labor market. Private payrolls dropped by 33,000 jobs last month, the first decline since March 2023, after a downwardly revised increase of 29,000 in May. Paramount, the parent company of CBS, has settled a lawsuit filed by U.S. President Donald Trump, agreeing to pay $16 million. The settlement resolves a lawsuit Trump brought alleging CBS deceptively edited a 60 Minutes interview with then Vice President Kamala Harris. The $16 million will be allocated to Trump's future presidential library and will not be paid directly to him. Paramount stated that the agreement does not include an apology or an admission of regret. CBS had previously maintained that Trump's lawsuit was completely without merit.
Well, CBS did something that was amazing. Kamala was unable to answer.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had stated his belief that the Federal Reserve could lower interest rates by September. Bessent's comments come as President Donald Trump repeatedly urges the Fed to cut raises from the current 4.25% to 4.50% range. Bessent suggested that if the Fed adheres to its creation that tariffs were not inflationary, a rate cut could happen by September or even sooner, adding that while he personally does agree with that specific criterion, it would logically lead to a fall rate cut.
We don't give out a date, but I can tell you we're getting close to the warning track. And I would just add, had a very successful lunch meeting with
Cuba has strongly condemned new U.S. restrictions on financial transactions and travel to islands, calling the policy a criminal behavior that violates the human rights of an entire nation. The new memorandum, signed by U.S. President Donald Trump, enforces the existing legal ban on U.S. tourism and mandates strict record keeping for authorized travel. Cuban Foreign Minister stated that measures intensified the economic blockade that has punished the Cuban people for years. This latest move comes after Trump reversed his predecessor's decision to remove Cuba from the state sponsors of terrorism list. In the MENA region, the Central Bank of Oman announced a slight increase in its foreign assets in May 2025, rising by 0.5% to 7.41 billion Omani rials. This is up from 7,372 billion rials in the same month last year. According to the bank's monthly report, these foreign assets included investments in securities worth 3.6 billion rials and overseas deposits of 3.038 billion rials. That report also indicated that traditional lending by Omani banks increased by 6.87% year-on-year in May, reaching 26.398 billion rials. Furthermore, deposits at Omani banks reached approximately 25.24 billion rials in May, and the money supply increased by 6.93% year-on-year. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian had ordered the country to suspend its cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency after U.S. airstrikes hit its most important nuclear facilities. The order didn't include timetables or details about what the suspension would entail. However, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi signaled that Tehran still would be willing to continue negotiations with the United States. Oil futures edge up on Wednesday as Iran suspended cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog, but a surprise build in U.S. crude supplies limited gains. Brent crude was up 39 cents or 0.6% to $67.50 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude rose 0.5% to $65.76 a barrel. Global prices firmed on Wednesday. Gold prices firmed on Wednesday as weaker than expected jobs data fueled expectations that the United States Federal Reserve may cut rates sooner than expected, while investors also awaited upcoming non-farm payrolls data for further market cues on monetary policy. Spot gold was up 0.3% at $3,347.59 per ounce, while U.S. gold futures rose 0.3% to $3,358.10. And finally, global stock markets presented a mixed picture today, with U.S. indices largely up, while European and Asian exchanges showed varied performances. In the United States, the S&P 500 rose by 0.24%, and the Nasdaq future increased by 0.77%, even as the Dow Jones edged up 0.01%. European bourses showed mixed movements. The United Kingdom's FTSE 100 was down 0.12%, but France's CAC 40 was up 1.04%, and Germany's DAX rose 0.41%. Meanwhile, Asian markets were varied. Japan's Nikkei 225 declined 0.56%, while the Shanghai Composite Index inched down by 0.09%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was up 0.62%. That brings us to the end of our economic bulletin. Here's what we have been covering. Russia's inflation slows faster than anticipated. Chinese President Xi Jinping calls for stepped-up efforts to build a unified national market. And Oman's foreign assets increased by 0.5% in May. This concludes our economic bulletin. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EG to stay informed. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.